Hi.
Hello, Esther. How are you?
Nice to meet you. Lovely to meet you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
That's for you.
Thanks so much. Welcome to our home. Yeah. So thanks for coming. And it's been a year already.
Yeah, I was just going to say that.
Yeah.
It's been a year. And I know you had told me that it would have been Reme's birthday. I believe just on Monday, last week Monday.
Yes.
How do you feel? Do you want to put that down?
Yes, thank you. I was just going to say these are lovely. Thank you. Reme would have loved them. So I'll place them here. I've become a collector of flowers since Reme's passing, and I suppose about her birthday on Monday. It's the first time without Reme. Well, she passed before her last birthday, but I wasn't present in the house last year, so I didn't get to feel the impact of her not, because she passed 3 weeks before her birthday. So, but actually being in the house and no Reme, no conversations, even coming to that week, was tough, because Reme would always want to have those conversations, plans, and it was really strange. No balloons, no cakes, no conversations apart from with my other children, and they were all away in college and work. Yeah. So it was even quieter. Reme would usually be the only person at home with me when everybody else is away. Yeah, so this time around, it was tough. I found it really, really strange in so many ways, because she just wasn't there, even if I felt like she was present. But physically, I had this whole experience that day of waiting to speak to her, waiting for her to step in and oh, Mom, I'm going to make jollof rice. She likes jollof rice, party jollof rice. I'm going to bake cupcakes and all of that. I was expecting to see Reme. I was expecting to step into her room to pray for her, as I would always do, for her to be present. I was expecting, for Reme to just show up. So I think I waited the whole day for Reme to show up on her birthday, and it was hard, because her memorial, it was tough enough that I couldn't even put out a post or anything, because I didn't think I was at that point accepting even
what had just happened.
Exactly. So on this day, it was around 9 p.m. or so. I was like, I really have to celebrate. It's Reme's birthday. So I managed to write a message celebrating her birthday. And I thought about it this way, that perhaps it was much easier to celebrate her birthday than to celebrate
the memorial
that she had passed. So I realized I was still in that moment of acceptance, feeling, how do I accept? Because on her birthday, I was waiting.
Wow. And
and yeah.
They say grief comes in different forms, but I know we'll be talking more about that later on when we do get to sit down.
Yeah.
But again, I'm sending you all my love.
Thank
you.
There's
really nothing you can say to someone who's in the process of grieving, but her memory lives on. That's
Amen.
what I can say. Hello and welcome back to On the Couch with Abby. Of course, I'm your host, Abidemi Taiwo. In the past, I have had the opportunity to talk or shine light on societal issues like mental health, breast cancer, and domestic violence. Today, we're going to be shining a light on sickle cell disease. In 2001 alone, over 1 million children were born with sickle cell. Today, I'm here with the lovely Onolememen family who lost a daughter and a sister, niece, granddaughter in 2023. Welcome. So, welcome. I'm going to start with Debbie, Queen Esther, and Jessie. Welcome, guys. Thank you so much for welcoming us into your home. I'm very much honored to be here.
Thank you. Thank you, Abby, for having us. Yeah.
So, where do we start? I think I'm going to start with Esther. I know we're here, and we're here to, first of all, I'd actually like to say thank you for giving me the honor on the opportunity to shine a light on this topic, because I know it's one that is very dear to your heart as an individual and as a family. And I'm very much aware of the fact that for the last 2 decades, you have been, pushing, championing this cause. So how do you feel 1 year later, after your daughter passed away from sickle cell?
You may say it's a year. For me, it feels like yesterday. I still feel Reme's presence every day in the house. And I still, for everything I do, Reme feels a part of it. Like yesterday morning, yesterday evening, I was eating what we call bokoto. And I remembered Reme trying to struggle with cow leg herself. So for everything I do, the memory she's still present, very present.
How has I understand what you've said, that she's still very present, and that's such a beautiful thing, isn't it? When you feel like, she's still very much here with you. So as a family, how has this affected you, sickle cell as a whole? Because, it's a no-brainer. The loss of a loved one would definitely have its effect on one's life.
I suppose you said as a family, we're a system, and the loss of Reme actually disrupted the whole system. I have my own experience of the impact of losing Reme, and I suppose my children here might have something else to say.
Should we go with you, Debbie?
I think it was definitely like a bit of a shock to the system, because for like me and my brothers, we've never actually had a very personal experience with regards to like losing a loved one or grief. It's always been like a distant family member, like an uncle or auntie that you're not too close to or anything. So for our first experience to have been like our sister, it was hard. It still is hard, to be honest. Like, I don't think you kind of ever get over grief. You just kind of learn how to cope with it. So, but then again, at the same time, I think it's made me learn to like value people around me and stuff like that, and like my family and friends a lot more as well.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that, Debbie. And yourself, Jessie? How has it affected you, the loss of your sister?
In many ways, I still don't know the answer to that question. But what I can say is that in the past 12 months, last year was probably it was the most difficult period of my life. But I kind of reframed it as less of this obstacle is going to eat me alive to how am I going to get out of this a stronger and a better person. So the last 12 months for me have been quite transformative, in the sense that I've used this as just an opportunity to make the most out of everything, because it kind of emphasized I suppose, the impermanence of it all. Kind of everything can go like. So every opportunity I've had since, I've tried to make the most out of it in my studies, in my academics, in my extracurriculars, in my personal life. And that mindset has kind of carried me forward over the last 12 months. So although I don't know exactly how it has affected me, I can say that I'm a much more driven, much stronger, and more resilient person than I was at the start of last year.
Wow. Incredible. Incredible. And, you know, today I don't want us to talk about Reme like a victim, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I want us to talk about her from a way that we could celebrate her. So that's what I want us to do. Okay? So, sickle cell. Esther, this is for you. Can you tell us, because obviously you're the mom, is there something we want to be able to raise awareness, and not just raise awareness, we want to be able to educate our viewers? What is it can we do? For myself, let's say, for example, I'm a young woman, because one thing I've found really is that a lot of people don't know about sickle cell. I mean, it affects millions of people. As I said earlier in my introduction, in 2021 alone, over 1 million babies were born with sickle cell. So what can we do to prevent this disease?
I suppose my school of thought about prevention is care. And when we talk about sickle cell, I would not normally delve into that conversation.
Right.
Because of the ethical, awareness around it. So I suppose I would speak about sickle cell more from an awareness point of view, because it's important for people to be aware. And the reason they have to be aware is knowing that when you have children with sickle cell, all they need is comprehensive care. That's what the WHO 2008 report states.
Okay.
So when there is the protocol of care that they require, like other conditions, then they can have better life outcomes. So it's in two levels, one for the government and one for the family. For instance, from the family point of view, it's important for people to be aware of their genotype. So I know in Ireland, many people would ring us up in the society looking for how to access, their genotype results, especially when young people are at that age of getting into a relationship or wanting to get married. They have already been in a relationship and now their families are beginning to, almost rival against, oh, you can't but marry because you have sickle cell and all of that. So this is where education has to start before you
Esther.
delve into that level of commitment with your partners. So knowing your genotype, ask your parents, go to your GP, get a referral to, do a genetic test so you know your genotype, so that before you begin to make commitments in relationship and get to that point where I'm noticing all the rivalry in, amongst, young adults that are at that stage needing to get married,
Tested.
contacting us.
Can I quickly
yeah.
cut you short if you don't mind me? You said genotype, because I want people to be able to understand what we're talking about when we say genotype, because there's different types. There's AS, there's AA, there's SS. So could you tell us a bit more about that so they know what we mean by genotype?
I think I will leave that on to
the professional.
Debbie.
Debbie is actually a medical student, aren't you, Debbie? Yeah. So we'll be talking more about shortly. Okay, go ahead, Esther.
So I suppose my advice to young people growing of age is to, even before then, from the age of 16, you should be able to have conversations with your parents about, do you know my genotype? Do I know my genotype? And for parents, you have to be aware of this. The reason being that we have, like I said, received a lot of calls from people at stages where, they have to make certain decisions. So I usually do not advise around this because of, again, the ethical issue and knowing your genotype and knowing your genetic status, whatever it is, then you can make an informed decision. So I know there is this whole sensitization around the religious groups enforcing people like, oh, if you have the same genotype, you cannot get married. I think we need to resensitize, change the narrative about what it means to have children living with sickle cell and what our responsibility as community leaders, religious leaders, healthcare professionals, aunties and uncles in the community, what our own responsibilities are. If you tell people you cannot get married, you cannot get married, what's your ethical positioning on that? How do you morally justify you telling them they cannot get married? It's not your position to tell them that.
So what would you advise someone, a young person who's come to you, Esther? Let's say, for example, I'm AS and I want to get married to a guy who's also AS. And I've come to you for advice, knowing that you have experience in this area.
I suppose, speaking from a point of, from a therapeutic experience working with families, it is not my decision to tell them whether or not to be married. What I will say to them, they make the best decisions for themselves so long as they are informed and aware of the outcome of whatever decisions they are going to make.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Esther. But then also from a mother's perspective of someone who has looked after children with, sickle cell traits. What advice from that perspective?
That's a more emotional perspective. And if you ask me, looking after children with sickle cell, some people might, of course, there's carer burden and all of that. If you ask me again, do I want Reme to come back to life? Whether Reme has sickle cell, mind you, Reme had disability and sickle cell. It was never a burden for me to care for my daughter Reme. So because she had sickle cell did not define who she was to me. It did not define how I treated her. Because having sickle cell does not make anybody any less.
Of course.
And it does not mean that, you see, the whole perception around stigma comes from how we view people that have sickle cell. You understand? And it comes from all this notion that, community leaders, religious leaders, and all of that, how they almost categorize or box people with sickle cell into that mindset of, oh, they will die quick, oh, this, that, blah, blah, blah. We have to destigmatize the ideas we have or we have come with from Africa.
Absolutely.
So as a mother, I don't regret having my children.
Of course.
Because if it's not sickle cell, it could be cancer, it could be diabetes, it could be cystic fibrosis, it could be anything else. However, I suppose it's the care, the management that is important. When I said before, I said it is two perspectives. One for the healthcare professionals and one for we as parents, community, religious leaders and all of that, to be aware our ethical responsibility in how we negotiate sickle cell awareness.
Absolutely. But Esther, what I was actually thinking of when you were speaking was more so from the child's perspective, wherever that child is, or an adult. Obviously, children grow up into an adult. That would it be fair on that child for the parents to be fully aware of the consequences that comes with both of them coming together? Does that am I making sense?
I suppose, you see, for the child's perspective, it will be best for a child to respond to that because I'm responding from a carer's perspective. And of course, as a carer, no matter what comes with your child or as a parent, so long as you're a responsible parent, you're willing to take care of that child. And mind you, technology and everything else, there is development, advancement in care and in medicine. I suppose sometimes I wonder when people say eradicate sickle cell, I say stop it. You cannot say eradicate. I don't advocate for eradication of sickle cell. Reason being that I cannot say, oh, my children with sickle cell, my friends' children with sickle cell, let's
where
ostracize all of them.
where are we going to take them to? Yeah.
There is no eradication.
So there's no
People will continue to, unless you're selecting your eggs and all of that. People will continue to have children with sickle cell.
Of course.
Unless you're selecting your eggs. There are other options, other ways of having children.
Definitely. I really want us to quickly talk about the stigma, because I know you mentioned the stigma that comes with it, especially from the African, perspective. I actually have a friend who I was speaking to recently, and he told me about what would have happened in Nigeria back in the 80s. Was saying stuff about maybe they think the child is bewitched and all of these things, and I honestly could not believe that such thoughts or could come across someone's mind from someone who is severely ill. But anyway, what are your experiences? Is there any severe or dramatic sort of stigma stories that you've heard in the past?
Of course, I've heard like a lot of people living with sickle cell sometimes do not want to come out and talk about because they don't want to be known with that sickle cell identity. And this is coming from somewhere. Number one, there's readiness. They have to be ready, to be willing to talk about it. And the other aspect is, how exposed they are and what, the family units they have come from, how these conversations are being heard as they are growing older. Are they comfortable enough to engage with even as little as their friends? Because once, I feel from experience, once you don't talk about it, you begin to fracture your support system. Because say for instance you're abroad, you have sickle cell crisis, none of your friends are aware because you're not talking about it because of that sense of stigmatization. When you run into a crisis, you wouldn't have the level of support or help you might have. But when people around you are aware, there's that sense of being, able to get more support when you run into any form. So I suppose it depends. It's a very sensitive area, and all of this depends on, personal positioning, But I suppose for me as a parent of children with sickle cell and being in my position as a community leader, all I try to do is to sensitize the community, to begin to destigmatize the narratives around having children with sickle cell and the ideas people project on them, which some of those ideas about, back in the days, we came in from Nigeria with about how they conceptualize people with sickle cell in Nigeria. We are the parents that came with those ideas, and these are the things we're passing on to our children.
That's right. That's right. I'm going to come back to you, Esther. So I'm going to come to you, Debbie. So Debbie is a medical student. She's studying medicine in Poland. Could you tell us a bit, I was asking your mom earlier about, the likes of genotype. If you could just shed some more light for people that don't know what that means.
So basically your genotype is more or less how your genes are made up. So when it comes to genetics, there's different types of inheritance patterns, and there's different types of genes. So some conditions, if you inherit, for example, one gene from one parent, can basically make the child affected, whereas other conditions you need two genes from a parent. So sickle cell is known as an autosomal recessive inheritance, and that basically means that you need two copies of a sickle cell gene in order to be affected by sickle cell. So you'd need two parents that are carriers, or you would need two people that have sickle cell, or for example, you would need a carrier and someone with sickle cell, and those are the different types of variations that can cause a child to have sickle cell. So in a situation that's very likely, carrier means there's, like you said, you mentioned earlier, there's a few genotypes. AS is a carrier genotype. So AS basically means like hemoglobin A and like a hemoglobin S, and your hemoglobin S is kind of like, the hemoglobin is not like a normal type of hemoglobin. It's basically a bit dysfunctional, which causes your red blood cells to have a sickle shape.
Right.
Whereas your hemoglobin A is like, let's just call it the standard hemoglobin, or like rather like normal type. So you can be AA, you can be AS, or you can be SS. You can have two types of hemoglobin S, or you can have one hemoglobin S. But in order to have sickle cell, you need to have two S's. So if, for example, two parents were to come together who are both carriers, and carriers usually don't have any symptoms, so there's no way that they'd actually be able to tell that they're carrying the sickle cell gene unless they were to get screened. And unfortunately, there's not many screening procedures unless, for example, you give birth to a child who's presenting with certain symptoms, like from a very young age. And newborn screening as well is something that I guess is still a new thing, and that they've been trying to like improve in Ireland for sickle cell in particular. So there's not like many ways to actually figure out, oh my gosh, am I going to have a child that has sickle cell, if you think that you're a carrier? And it would probably require you knowing like a bit more of your family history and if someone has sickle cell or not. So I hope that makes sense.
It does. It does. What I'm hearing you say is that if I have not tested, or if I do not know what genotype I'm carrying, there's no way, or my husband to be does not know his genotype, and we have a child. If that child is not presenting with symptoms, there's no way we would know if, the sickle cell traits in there or not. So can you tell me, Debbie, I know there's, I don't know if I'm saying this right now, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. There's two different types of sickle cell. One could be severe and one could just be the disease. Am I correct in saying that?
So when it comes to sickle cell, I definitely think that you're very right in saying like, well, essentially sickle cell presents in many different forms. I don't think it's like one size fits all. There are like different types of like sickle cell presentations. However, I don't think I would be like the best person to speak about that. But some people, for example, someone can have sickle cell and they can have a crisis once in a year, or they can have a crisis every 2 years. Whereas another person can have sickle cell and they can have a crisis once a month. So like my mom had mentioned earlier, there's a lot of like ideations that are projected onto people with sickle cell, and they're kind of fit into like this single image, and they're you kind of just pigeonhole anyone with sickle cell, and you're just like, okay, life expectancy 50 years, this is that, always in pain, always gets blood transfusions. There's a lot of sickle cell patients that don't receive blood. Exactly, a lot of sickle cell patients don't receive blood transfusions. A lot of them do. Some have never received blood transfusions. Some get them every 5 weeks. So it depends. Like you can't just kind of put everyone with sickle cell into just one boat, and I don't think it's also right to do so. And then also some people are on stronger medication, some people are not as on a medication that's as strong as well. So it really does depend on the individual, and I think that's why like patient-centered care is really important.
Because it's specific to that patient.
Exactly.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to go back to you, Esther. We just talked about different, about how sickle cell varies. I know with Reme, I remember at the memorial, I saw, and I hope I'm okay saying this, I saw that she had lost some hair, and I was left baffled even myself, and I was thinking, okay, what had happened? And I said, you know what, I would speak to you about this if you can sort of enlighten us into the severity of how it varies when it comes to sickle cell.
I suppose Debbie actually already covered that, but in relation to Reme, I suppose Reme would have been one kind of rare sickle cell, quite, high severity case. Not too many people with sickle cell would have, experienced the level of severity Reme would have experienced. So her situation was quite unique, and when she was a child, she went through quite life-threatening, experiences with sickle cell, I suppose I'll give it to her healthcare team at the time, for all the hard work for taking care of her and, her coming through those phases that you would have seen one of those photos. Like there were many times we had thought Reme would have left us, but for the care she's received. That's why, when I speak, I say awareness is in folds, one for us in the community and the other one for the government and healthcare professionals. So she would have experienced quite, severe levels where, blood transfusion, did not work for her. She experienced what they call hyperhemolytic syndrome, which is quite rare for people that take transfusion. So it meant that her own blood reacted, right? That's the explanation. I'm asking the medical
was her blood
students.
rejecting the blood that was
Something around that
Right.
description,
Okay.
and it's kind of triggered onto so many other complications, which is what, when people have sickle cell and they suffer severe complications, it can lead on to further complications, but the good news at that point in time was she went through all of that. She came out of it, which meant that she received excellent care, so, and
she was a fighter.
yes, she was. She was. And she lived through it with a lot of courage, which is what we tap into today when we remember Reme. We remember how it has strength, how she fought, how she lived, how she never gave up.
Wow.
How she kept going. If you saw Reme, you wouldn't know all what she was going through. So when we remember Reme, we remember her. I personally remember her with that strength. And the reason we're standing here today, is because Reme could go. So we we have life and we are not as sick as she was. Why can I not go? So I suppose, and thinking about her memory in a way that immortalizes her has given us, more strength, which, is the whole idea about when you first of all ask that question about what's the one important thing we might want to know. I straight away wanted to go into Roscroft. I said, no, I leave
We're
this
coming to
till,
that.
and yeah, that's one area, research. And I think, I might have to, when that question comes, leave it for Jessie to
Definitely,
respond. Yeah.
definitely. That's what I'm keeping Jessie here for. Jessie's going to tell us all about Roscoff. But before I move on to Jessie, last question for you, Esther. I know when we were speaking on the phone, we spoke about grief and how grief affects families. And you mentioned something that really, really touched my heart. You said you would like to start in the future, maybe start something like a community for people who have lost their children, because that comes with another stigma as well as a parent when you've lost your child. And we spoke a lot about, what was that verse from the Bible that, we shall not lose our young. And we spoke about that in depth. Do you want to tell us a bit more about that before we move on to
I
Jessie?
suppose losing my child, Reme, was another thing that brought another level of awareness for me, in the sense that there's also a stigmatization that goes with the loss of a child. And I suppose from where I stand and the lens I'm looking through, is the fact that we are made to believe or interpret our religious beliefs into almost dehumanizing a child that's passed on, or stigmatizing the loss of a child. Reason being that there's a lot of superstition around you lose your child. I couldn't witness the burial of my child. I didn't attend her funeral. Yes, that's acceptable. They are traditional beliefs. I know a lot of African parents now will go at me for saying all of these things, you know, that's acceptable. Yes, it's a traditional belief. But the fear of dead bodies is a huge one. When I lost my child, when the funeral home said they needed a family member to clean her up, to dress her up, make her up, and get her ready for her funeral, nobody from my family was up for that. Everybody was like, they have to do it. Yes. I said, okay, I'm going to do it. No, you can't. Like, this was a huge row.
Can I ask, does the funeral home not do that?
Well, they would normally do that. Of course, the advocate that I am, from speaking to them, I said, Reme is an African child, and I would appreciate if you recognize that in making her up, in getting her ready and all of that. And I think that was a real sensitive conversation. And they were like, oh, I don't think they are very well equipped to, do all of those.
And I think that's a gap for them,
exactly.
if I can say that.
Yeah.
Because Ireland is I don't know the
country.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't know the exact statistics, but there's so many Africans. There's so many. It's a multi-island.
It's a heterogeneous country right now. It's absolutely moved on. Yeah, there's a huge shift.
So I think it's about time they need to actually put something like that in place.
Yeah. So I suppose for me it was a thing where I had to stand against all odds to say I was going to do it myself. And the only question I asked myself was, would Reme want me to do this? And there was no two ways to that answer. Yes, she would. She would love you to do her makeup. She would love you. And for me, how I interpreted it was whether she was dead or not. She's still my child. I carried her for 9 months. I gave birth to her. Why can I not make her up? And I think for so many people, this was a taboo. It wasn't the African just community, yeah. It wasn't just, that was the taboo. The whole idea about me going to her grave and all of that.
Right.
I would have people say things like, oh, we shouldn't see the grave of our child and all of that. I said, hold on. So I should just forget my child's grief because of my culture. Like, I don't get what this whole conversation. I see this as stigmatization. What makes her less because she's my child? Yes, I agree with the part the Bible says we shall not bury our young. But where there is sickness or illness or anything that causes us to lose our young, do we just walk away from that young? What are we educating our children about? So for me, these are all these are very sensitive conversations. As I say, I know the African parents and pastors and everybody will come at me at this. And listen, I'm ready to educate people because you have to be in my shoes to understand the lens I'm seeing things through. A lot of mothers that have lost their children have suffered adverse effects because they believe in this tradition. They believe in this tradition, like, oh, I cannot bury my child, I cannot do this, I cannot do that.
Which perhaps causes more trauma.
Exactly, guilt. Yes. So I suppose, my experience, I had to face a lot of these conversations because of how I approached, my daughter's death. Which is why, in our conversation, I said, listen, I think I have to focus on raising awareness around loss of a child.
Yeah. And you're doing a great job with the SOSI.
Roscoff.
No, not Roscoff.
Okay, SCSI, Sickle Cell Society Ireland, yes.
And now
that's the mother organization to Roscoff.
And now Roscoff. Yeah. So, Jessie, Roscoff was launched on the day of the memorial on the 1st of March, 2024. Could you tell us what the research agency is about? Give us a call to action. What should we be doing in Ireland?
The purpose of the foundation is to address the gap in research available regarding the care needs and treatment for sickle cell patients. I think it stems largely from using both my sisters as case studies here in the way they manifest in their illness, which Debbie touched on earlier. There's quite a difference, and little is understood, little is known about what causes the difference. And we believe that understanding this through a scientific approach can help produce better patient outcomes, because there's a lot more research, there's a lot more that needs to be understood about the illness, and currently there's a significant gap. There's thousands of, if not hundreds of thousands, of medical journals published yearly, quarterly, or available at the moment on cancer research or on cystic fibrosis. And also, this kind of ties into the whole premise of raising awareness. There's very few available at the moment on sickle cell, and there is a huge power in scientific research. I think recently, whether in the last 5 years or so, in University of California, I may be wrong, but in the States, they've done some research into using CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing as a way to cure sickle cell. And previously, the only treatment option was a bone marrow transplant, which came with its own host of complications, and it was never really a feasible option. But this here, as kind of like, this burgeoning area of like research and innovation, that's the kind of stuff that we hope to foster and we hope to facilitate through the foundation. And just on a note, because my mum touched on it there, in the sense that it's a daughter organization of the Sickle Cell Society of Ireland, it's because the Sickle Cell Society of Ireland focuses more on raising awareness and support, community support, stamping out stigma, policy stuff, kind of the more qualitative side, for lack of a better word. But Roscroft is focused solely on that quantitative scientific side, as in achieving, they both have the mission for Sickle Cell Society of Ireland is caring for families affected by sickle cell. And Roscroft's vision is improving the lives of patients with sickle cell and people affected by sickle cell through research. So the whole aim of the organization is to address that gap and hope to produce better outcomes through that.
And for anyone who's asking, what does ROSCOF means? It means Reme Onolememen Sickle Cell Research Foundation. Yeah, great stuff. Thank you. Thank you all so much for sharing your story on the couch with Abby. So inspiring.
Thank
you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
And Reme's legacy lives
On. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for watching this episode of On the Couch with Abby. I hope you have been inspired by the Onolememen's story and educated as well, because that's a very key part. Get to learn more about sickle cell. It is very important that we are not ignorant and we stay informed. I'm your host, Abidemi Taiwo. See you soon.